March 15, 1943, Guadalcanal. The radar operator from Minnesota leaned closer to the glowing screen as new echoes bloomed across the scope. 17 blips. Tight formation. High altitude. Japanese bombers, approaching from the northwest. On the muddy strip at Henderson Field, the P-39 Airacobras sat like forgotten machines, squat, awkward fighters with noses too long and wings too short. Planes the Japanese pilots had learned to dismiss. Planes American pilots rarely requested. Captain Bill Morrison checked his ammunition counter one last time. 30 rounds. That was all the 37mm cannon carried. 30 chances. Other squadrons got the P-38s. Others got Thunderbolts. Morrison's unit flew what was left. The scramble horn cut through the humid morning, and 12 P-39s clawed for the sky. Morrison's engine screamed behind his head, the Allison V-12 pushing air that grew thinner with every second. The Airacobra was the only American fighter with its engine mounted behind the pilot, a design quirk that made it fly differently, sound differently, and kill differently. The Japanese bomber crews expected another easy mission. Their Zero escorts had been hunting P-39s for months. Some pilots even waggled their wings as they rolled toward the Americans, mockery born of habit. At 15,000 feet, Morrison's climb slowed to a crawl. The temperature needle crept upward. His wingman, a young pilot from Ohio named Patterson, was already dropping back. The Zeros split cleanly into attack groups, rolling inverted and diving with gravity on their side. Standard doctrine. Attack from above. The P-39 couldn't follow. The first Zero came screaming down, guns blazing. Tracers ripped through Morrison's left wing, punching quarter-sized holes through aluminum. He kicked the rudder hard, throwing the aircraft sideways. A violent skid only the Airacobra's strange balance allowed. The Zero overshot. The Japanese pilot made the same mistake they all did. He pulled up to regain altitude. Morrison centered the belly of the Zero in his gun sight. The 37mm cannon fired once. The Zero didn't burn. It didn't break apart. It ceased to exist. The explosion scattered wreckage across miles of jungle canopy. Morrison had seen machine gun kills before. This was different. This was erasure. For half a second, the Japanese formation hesitated. That was long enough. Patterson's cannon spoke next, catching a Zero mid-bank. The shell entered behind the cockpit and detonated the fuel tank. The aircraft flashed into an orange star and vanished. Now the bombers were in range. Green tracers from defensive guns reached toward the Americans. Morrison knew the numbers, rifle caliber fire against armor plate, but luck didn't care about mathematics. AP-39 piloted by Kowalski from Buffalo took hits along its belly. Coolant streamed out like blood. The engine would seize in minutes. Kowalski didn't turn away. He lined up on a bomber and fired. The third round entered through the nose glazing, traveled the length of the fuselage, and detonated in the tail. The bomber split in half. Kowalski's engine died 30 seconds later. Morrison dove after the lead bomber, the Airacobra accelerating like a dropped stone. The aircraft shook violently. The P-39's reputation for deadly spins earned honestly, but Morrison held it steady. The cannon jammed. Time compressed into a narrow tunnel. He yanked the charging handle once, twice, 3 times. The mechanism reset. Bullets shattered his canopy, missing his head by inches. He fired. The shell turned the bomber's engine into shrapnel. A propeller sheared off, slicing through the air and clipping another bomber beside it. 2 aircraft fell away, crews bailing out into the open sky. Below, 20,000 pounds of bombs fell harmlessly into jungle and ocean. The surviving bombers turned north. Fuel gauges dipped. Engines coughed. Morrison shepherded his damaged wingmen home. Henderson Field appearing through heat haze and exhaustion. He landed with a blown tire, ground looped to a stop, and sat shaking in the cockpit. Ground crews counted 43 bullet holes in his aircraft. That afternoon's report confirmed 5 bombers destroyed and 4 Zeros downed. The Japanese after-action report would later describe the Airacobra's cannon with a single phrase: Demon Thunder. And Morrison knew something had changed. The P-39 wasn't useless. It was misunderstood, and the enemy was beginning to learn why. The Japanese came back 2 days later. This time there were more of them. 23 bombers, 18 Zeros, approaching at dawn, lower than before, trying to slip beneath radar coverage. The coast watcher on Vela La Vela spotted them just in time. The warning crackled over the radio while Morrison was still pulling on his gloves. 8 P-39s lifted into the humid morning air, engines protesting the climb almost immediately. The Japanese escort stayed high, well above 20,000 feet, where the Airacobras could barely breathe. It was deliberate. Let the Americans commit to the bombers, then strike from above. Morrison saw the trap forming and made a decision that would have ended his career back in training command. He ignored the bombers. Instead of leveling off, he shoved the throttle forward and pulled the nose up toward the Zeros. 8 P-39s climbing straight at 18 enemy fighters. The Allison engines screamed in protest. Oil pressure sagged. Cylinder head temperatures edged toward red. At 16,000 feet, the Airacobras were dying, but they didn't need altitude. They needed hesitation. And for just a heartbeat, the Japanese pilots hesitated. The P-39 spread into a loose line, each pilot picking a target. If the Zeros dove away, they would expose their bellies. If they committed, they would fight where the Airacobra was strongest, head-on, brutal, decisive. The Japanese leader chose to engage. The sky collapsed into chaos. Morrison held his fire as the lead Zero closed fast. Tracers snapped past his canopy. At 300 yards, he squeezed the trigger. The cannon fired once and jammed. He swore, yanking the charging handle as the Zero filled his windscreen. Both aircraft fired at the same instant. Japanese shells tore holes the size of plates through Morrison's wing. His cannon round struck behind the engine. The Zero detonated so close that fragments hammered Morrison's fuselage like hail. Patterson scored moments later, his shell blowing a Zero apart so violently it damaged another aircraft flying alongside. Jenkins, the farm kid from Iowa, discovered a strange advantage of the P-39 in thin air. It could flat spin on command and recover. He used it to drop behind a Zero and fire 3 shots into its tail. The fighter came apart in sections, but the Japanese were hitting back. Rodriguez from California took cannon shells through the cockpit. His Airacobra fell burning toward the sea. Wilson from Georgia tried to dive away, hit the P-39's deadly spin zone, and disappeared into cloud. He bailed out at 6,000 feet and survived 3 strafing passes before locals hit him for weeks. While fighters tangled overhead, the bombers pressed on. Four Marine Wildcats slipped through the chaos, climbing unnoticed. They attacked from above, their 6 machine guns chewing into the bomber formation. 3 Japanese aircraft went down before the Zeros could respond. Morrison, now down to 8 cannon rounds and nursing a wounded engine, spotted a lone Zero trailing smoke and fleeing north. He dove, gaining speed despite the damage. The Japanese pilot never saw him. 1 round ended it. The bombers jettisoned their loads short of Henderson Field and turned back. Fuel-starved Zeros could not pursue. The tally was grim and astonishing all at once. 6 Japanese fighters destroyed, 3 bombers downed. 2 American pilots killed. But something else mattered more. Japanese radio intercepts in the following days told the story. Bomber crews demanded larger escorts. Some refused missions outright. The 37mm cannon had earned a reputation. 1 shot, 1 death. Morrison landed with 3 gallons of fuel left. His crew chief stared at the wrecked wing and shook his head. It would fly again, somehow, but only through ingenuity and sleepless nights. That night, Morrison's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He wrote a letter to Mary he could never send. About fear. About bargains made with God. About watching souls leave bodies in flashes of fire. The next week passed in maintenance and training. Sergeant Lucas worked miracles, retiming cannons, polishing chambers, inventing solutions manuals never mentioned. New pilots arrived, green, eager, terrified. Morrison taught them one rule above all others. The P-39 isn't a duelist. It's an ambush predator. 1 shot, 1 kill, then get out. On April 2nd, the Japanese returned in force. 40 bombers, 30 fighters, and something new. Among the Zeros flew stubby-winged Ki-44s, faster, heavier, deadlier. Morrison climbed to meet them, every P-39 loaded to the last cannon round. He picked a bomber at the edge of the formation and fired. The shell entered the bomb bay. The aircraft vanished in a blast so violent it damaged 2 others nearby. The battle exploded across miles of sky, Wildcats diving, P-39s slashing through bomber formations, P-44s screaming downward in pursuit. Blood streaked Patterson's face after a cockpit hit, but he stayed in the fight. And then Morrison saw Baker. The kid from Vermont froze as a Zero filled his mirrors. Morrison couldn't reach him in time. Baker chopped throttle and dumped full flaps. The Airacobra nearly stopped midair. The Zero overshot. Baker's cannon fired once. There was nothing left. The battle raged for 23 minutes. When it ended, 11 bombers were gone. Henderson Field still stood. Morrison landed with 2 cannon rounds remaining. The Airacobra was barely holding together. But the enemy had learned the lesson. The unwanted fighter had become something else entirely. And the war over Guadalcanal would never be the same again. The air war over Guadalcanal did not slow down. It hardened. By mid-April 1943, the Japanese had adjusted their tactics. They flew tighter bomber formations, layered their escorts vertically, and brought newer fighters to counter the Airacobra's sudden lethality. But no matter how carefully they planned, the same truth kept asserting itself. Every time a P-39 got close enough, something died. The Americans paid for that truth in blood. Morrison watched Baker, the kid from Vermont, die during a high-speed slashing attack gone wrong. The P-39 entered an accelerated stall at nearly 400 miles per hour. There was no recovery. The aircraft tore itself apart under G-forces before Baker could even reach the canopy latch. He was 20 years old. He had one confirmed kill. His last radio call was his mother's name. Losses like that stacked quickly. Of the original 16 pilots in Morrison's squadron, 5 were dead by late April. 3 more were wounded badly enough to be sent home. 2 cracked under the strain and were quietly reassigned. Morrison, 24 years old, was now the senior pilot. The aircraft were dying too. Engines rated for 500 hours were being pushed past 1,000. Airframes were cracked, patched, reinforced with scavenged metal. Each P-39 was a flying contradiction, held together by American manufacturing, field improvisation, and pure refusal to quit. Sergeant Lucas became a legend among the ground crews. He built working cannons from 3 damaged ones, machined parts on a lathe salvaged from a Japanese repair depot, substituted captured brake fluid for hydraulics, and fabricated fuel lines from wrecked bombers. Every aircraft flew with a story written into its skin. On April 18th, intelligence came down from above the squadron level. Admiral Yamamoto himself would be flying that morning. The mission to intercept him went to the long-range P-38s. Morrison's squadron was assigned to cover Guadalcanal in case of a diversion. The diversion came. More than 50 Japanese aircraft approached in a formation Morrison had never seen. Bombers stacked vertically, fighters weaving between altitude layers. It was elegant. It was deadly. Morrison broke every rule he'd ever been taught. Instead of climbing, he dove. 6 P-39s slashed through the formation at nearly 450 miles per hour, firing cannon rounds in passing. There was no turning, no dogfighting, just violence delivered at impossible closing speeds. Explosions followed them through the sky. But speed had a price. Baker's aircraft snapped into a spin during the dive. Morrison watched helplessly as it disintegrated. The loss gutted him, but the attack worked. The Japanese formation shattered, bombers scattered, and the Wildcats and P-40s tore into the chaos from below. That night, word came through. Yamamoto was dead. The architect of Pearl Harbor had been shot down on the same day his diversionary raid failed. Morrison felt no triumph, only exhaustion. 2 days later, orders arrived. He was being rotated home, not to rest, to teach. The Army had finally understood what the P-39 truly was. Not a failure, but a specialist. A bomber killer. A precision weapon. A flying artillery piece that could change the outcome of a battle if used correctly. Before leaving, Morrison flew one last mission. 6 bombers. 8 fighters. Routine. His cannon held 3 rounds. He fired twice. 1 Zero burned. Another limped away trailing smoke. On approach to Henderson Field, the engine finally failed. A connecting rod snapped, ending months of abuse in a single metallic scream. Morrison dead-sticked the P-39 onto the coral runway, bounced twice, and stopped 50 feet from the fuel dump. He climbed out without looking back. A week later, he stood on a transport ship watching Guadalcanal fade into haze. In his pocket was a photograph of a newborn boy, William Jr., a future that existed only because Henderson Field still stood. The P-39 Airacobra would never be famous. It would never be sleek or beloved or mythologized. But for 6 brutal months in 1943, it had done exactly what was required. 1 shot, 1 kill, and enough courage to get close enough to pull the trigger.